songs of the 1950s, my personal 30 favourite songs from the decade of the 50s. The rule I apply for this list, and these lists across all the decades I've done so far, is that each artist can only really appear once. If they are going to appear more than once, it has to be songs from different albums. But in fact, for the 50s, that doesn't really actually stop you doing much, because in the 50s it was really common for artists to not really release albums, because the single was the format of choice. That's what people would actually buy. And then later on, if the artist was successful, a bunch of singles and a bunch of other songs would get thrown together into an album and released as like a larger record. So yeah, what I mean by that is that actually many songs by 50s artists aren't really on albums at all. So we are now on number 29. Well, we've just listened to number 29, which is Bebopalula. Number 30 was Rumble, Link Ray. There will be refreshers. There will be sort of recaps every 5 songs. So if you've only just joined now, or you joined halfway through or whatever, you will be brought up to speed. But anyway, here we are. I mentioned Johnny Cash a second ago. Number 28 is I Walk the Line, Johnny Cash. And we've got this beautifully nostalgic Windows Movie Maker video here. Pretty vintage, not quite as vintage as the 50s, but certainly a throwback. Johnny Cash is one of those artists that has loads of great songs that you would recognise. He's one of those artists that all of his songs I kind of like on level pegging, none of which I like really love, but they're all good songs. And I decided to go with I Walk the Line. There were some others I considered. Some of them wind up being in the 60s as well, so I was only limited by the 50s ones. But yeah, I think I Walk the Line, classic track. It's probably one of Johnny Cash's most well-known songs, so I'd be surprised if you guys don't know this one. Yeah, Antique Android is saying it's their favourite Johnny Cash song. Oscar says Ghost Riders in the Sky. Yeah, I don't really know that one very well. That was like a TV theme or something, was it? I can't remember. Oscar says they missed the end of my top 60 stream. Yes, the VOD will go up for that. The video will be released on the second channel soon. So if you haven't seen all of these lists, I've now done 2010s, the 2000s, 90s, etc., etc. Almost all of them are available on my second YouTube channel, and many of them are also available here on Twitch. But on Twitch, they kind of get muted out of existence because with all of the songs I'm playing, all the songs get automatically muted. So it's kind of unlistenable. I've just actually released the VOD on Twitch of the 60s one if you want to go see it, but wait till after this, I would say. So anyway, let's have a listen to I Walk the Line by Johnny Cash, number 28.
I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line. I find it very, very easy to be true. I find myself alone when each day's through. Yes, I'll admit that I'm a fool for you.
Something that's interesting about this song is that there's no drums on it. If you listen, the rhythm is, I think it's like the strings of a guitar muted being strummed to get that. There's no actual drums on this.
As sure as night is dark and day is light, I keep you on my mind both day and night. And happiness I've known proves that it's right. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
Could be a washboard, yeah.
You've got a way to keep me on your side. You give me cause for love that I can't hide. For you I know I'd even try to turn the tide. Because you're mine, I walk the line. I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
Sorry for the phone staring. I'm just posting on Instagram about what I'm doing right now. But that was Johnny Cash, I Walk the Line, number 28 on my list of the top 30 songs of the 1950s. Let's move on. Number 27, Howling Wolf. Howling Wolf is a classic blues artist, very influential on the rock music that would come later. Artists like Led Zeppelin took a lot from Howling Wolf, often quite literally. Smokestack Lightning is well regarded as one of I think Howling Wolf's most influential track. I mentioned a minute ago as well how the 1950s, the recording quality was sometimes quite hit and miss, because recorded music was a fairly new medium. It was only now we were getting, in the 50s, we were getting to a point where it was recording music was more than just sticking a couple of microphones in a room with a live band. It was more a process of thinking about recorded music as a medium onto itself rather than a representation of a live performance. And the reason I mention that is that I think this is a particularly good recording for Howling Wolf for blues. I think blues recordings could be really hit and miss at this point. Sometimes, it doesn't always ruin the experience, but sometimes when it's just a bit too much hiss and there's not enough low end, it kind of just ruins the experience of listening to the music. But this is a particularly nicely recorded track, Howling Wolf. I believe this was co-written and produced by Willie Dixon, who is another blues legend. Smokestack Lightning. See EK Crisp asking how to watch the previous countdowns I've done, the countdowns of the 2010s, the 2000s, 90s, 80s, etc. They're all on my second YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed to my second YouTube channel, which is literally called David Bennett Piano's second channel, that's where you'll find them all. They are also available on Twitch as VODs, but they're heavily muted due to copyright, so I would recommend watching them on the second channel. Andante Stickerbush, thank you for putting that link in the chat. The link to my second channel is in the chat right now, courtesy of Andante. And Fleo33, thank you so much for subscribing via Prime. You can now enjoy the new stickers. And and Stereo 16 on the second channel, you're completely correct. You can also watch me jumping out of an aeroplane, because I did a skydive and it's available on the second channel. Anyone else skydived in the chat here? Any other skydivers available for comment?
here, baby, since I've been gone.
Yeah, I can see. Oh, EK Crisp. Yeah, I'm calling them stickers. Emotes. I think every company has a different name for these things, but yeah, emoticons, emotions, symbols, icons. And yes, I can see a lot of people mentioning Tina Turner has died. I saw that pop up on my phone literally just as I started the stream. How old was she? She couldn't have been... Oh, 83. I didn't realise she was that old. Yeah, Tina Turner has died. Absolute legend. Afraid she won't be appearing in the stream, but... Yeah. Classic artist. Wow. Anyway. Let's move on. Sorry, Tina Turner's death has sort of suddenly changed the mood a bit here, but let's lighten things up a bit with Dearest by Buddy Holly. Now you'll see on screen a film that is very much not from the 1950s, Juno. I don't know if you guys remember the film Juno. Came out, I don't know, 2000 and something, 2008 maybe, 7. Juno has a really great soundtrack. I don't know if you've seen this film. I really like it. I really like the film. It has a really good soundtrack. And one of the songs that it has on it is Dearest by Buddy Holly. And the reason Juno appears to be on screen is because the most commonly available version of Dearest by Buddy Holly is a version that came out in the 60s where they'd dubbed on some extra instruments, some extra track to it, making it sound fuller. And I don't really like that version. I wanted the original version, which is far more bare bones, and it happens to be the version on the Juno soundtrack, so that was a way of finding it. But of course, if anybody doesn't know, Buddy Holly tragically died in 1959 in a plane crash, along with the Big Bopper, who was another musician, and I believe, was it Carl Perkins? It was another rock and roll musician. In an event that was called The Day the Music Died, which is what inspired the song American Pie by Don McLean, if you didn't know that. But yeah, Buddy Holly, he was in the band The Crickets, which was a major influence on the Beatles, hence Crickets, Beatles, insects, that's where the Beatles name comes from. But Buddy Holly was only really 2 or 3 years into his career when he suddenly died. And this song hadn't been fully recorded yet at the time of his death. Hence why this version is so bare bones. This is the version that he had done at the point at which he died. And then, of course, as I said, in the 60s, they released this album where they kind of... chat saying, is it Richie Valens? Was it Richie Valens who died? Or was it Carl Perkins? I can't remember. I want to look it up. But yeah, the 60s, they kind of posthumously completed some of Buddy Holly's unfinished recordings. But I'm not a big fan of it. I prefer the original, even if it's a bit more stripped back, even if it sounds like a demo. It's got a uniqueness to it. Yes, it was Richie Valens, not Carl Perkins. Carl Perkins did not die in that plane crash. That was fake news, I'm afraid. Although it was very old fake news. I'm just looking up Carl Perkins, who died in 1998. So yeah, much different, much more different. Anyway, let's have a listen to this. This is Dearest by Buddy Holly, the original version recorded mere months before Buddy Holly tragically died.
To my heart, please don't ever say we'll part. You scold and you were so bold. Yes, together, our love will grow old. Our love will grow old. You may be a million miles away. Please believe me when you hear from these sleepless nights. Try my love again, yeah, I'm gonna treat you right. Yeah, I'm gonna treat you right.
Very simple little recording, very sweet song. Yeah, just a shame he never got to finish it the way he wanted to. But that was Dearest, Buddy Holly, number 26 on my list of the top 30 songs of the 1950s. And with that, we should and we do get a recap for anybody who hasn't been here so far. So at the beginning, we started with Rumble by Link Ray. Then we had Bebop-A-Lula, I Walk the Line, Johnny Cash, Smokestack Lightning, Howling Wolf, and we just listened to Dearest by Buddy Holly. So let's move on. As you can see, we've got all of these songs to come. I feel like the 50s is perhaps one of the hardest decades for you guys to predict, because apart from the pictures you saw at the very beginning, this picture, apart from that, I don't think you could, from my videos at least on YouTube, predict what I particularly like from the 50s. So there's a couple artists which if you've been paying a lot of attention on my YouTube channel, you'll be able to predict, but apart from that, Oscar is committing to Johnny B. Good. As I said earlier, there will definitely be Chuck Berry. We know that because he appeared in that picture, and there actually will be 2 Chuck Berrys. But anyway, let's move on to number 25, and it's Mr. Sandman, which is actually a song I've covered on my YouTube channel back before I started doing the videos you know me for. I used to record piano covers on YouTube, and Mr. Sandman was one of them. Now, many of you will know Mr. Sandman from Back to the Future, where it's played when Marty first goes back to 1955. The version that gets played in the film is a different version. It's one of 3 versions that came out this same year, 54. It was very common in the 50s for artists to cover other songs that had come out recently, and also very quickly, so in the same year, sometimes within months. Because back then, at least, the pop music industry was very sort of fast-paced. The recordings were often done in a matter of a day because there was no real overdubbing, and it was all seen as a bit of a hype machine, really. Like, pop music was a new fad. It's a bit like, I don't know, TikTok now. It's been around. It had been around so briefly at this point that most people thought it was a passing craze that would soon die out. But of course, it did not. But this is the version of Mr. Sandman that I prefer. This is by the Chordettes. Mr. Sandman. Chet Atkins has a version too, yes. Oscar.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him 2 lips like roses and clover. Then tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone. Don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
I love this part of the song. I love how the beginning it's really stripped back, gorgeous harmonies, vibraphone, whatever it is, and then we get this great sort of jazz rhythm section come out of nowhere, and suddenly gives it all this energy.
I'm so alone, don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Bum 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 bum. Mr. Sandman,
Yes?
bring us a dream. Give him a pair of
It's Stereo 16 correctly has identified that I did talk about this song in my secondary dominance video. This is a great example of a type of chord called a secondary dominant. So go check that out if you haven't done so before.
Mr. Sandman, someone to hold would be so peachy before we're too old. So please turn on your magic beam, Mr. Sandman, bring us, please, 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 Mr. Sandman, bring us a dream.
Mr. Sandman, the Chordettes. As I said, there's various versions of that. As with many of the songs on this list, actually, they're not necessarily the original version, because it was such a common trend in the 50s to cover other people's songs. So there'd be loads of versions of the same song, many in the charts at the same time as each other. Just quite a unique thing. You can't imagine that today, like having more than one version of the same song out at the same time, but that was the trend at the time. Let's move on. Number 24. Another good example of what I was just saying. This song is from what is called the Great American Songbook. So It's Only a Paper Moon was not written by Nat King Cole, and it was not even written in the 50s. It was, off the top of my head, was at least written in the 40s, maybe earlier. The Great American Songbook is basically an unofficial collection of classic songs originally written for Broadway musicals and sometimes films as well. Lots of the classic jazz standards come from the American Songbook, and these are songs that have been covered and reinterpreted so many times that there's not really an original artist. So It's Only a Paper Moon, you could probably find a version of it by any jazz singer you could imagine. Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Bing Crosby, they all would have done it at some point. But I've gone with Nat King Cole here for his version of it. I wanted to put a Nat King Cole song in. I love Nat King Cole. I couldn't decide which song to go with. He's got loads of great songs. Many of my favourite songs by his were actually either the 40s or the 60s. It didn't really line up. I think I wanted to include Nature Boy, which is a great song by him. Just wondering now when Nature Boy came out, because if it came out in the 50s and I've missed my opportunity to include it, I will be very annoyed. But I feel like I would have checked that surely. So Nature Boy came out in 1948, so I couldn't include it here. If you don't know Nature Boy, by the way, fantastic song by Nat King Cole, written by a very interesting character who basically pioneered the hippie movement. But that's a story for another time. This is It's Only a Paper Moon, which was written by Harold Arlen, who I believe also wrote the music for The Wizard of Oz. So, for example, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's Only a Paper Moon.
It is only a paper moon hanging over a cardboard sea, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believe in me. It is only a canvas sky sailing over a muslin tree, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believe in me. Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played on a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believe in me.
Stereo 16 says that they had just listened to my version of Mr. Sandman on YouTube and they really enjoyed it. So thanks for that. There's actually a version out there somewhere on YouTube where some guy really liked my version and decided he wanted to sing over the top of it. So there's this great version out there somewhere of him singing over my piano playing. Quite an unusual thing to do, I thought, because it means there's like two versions of the melody, me and him. But it was quite fun and I appreciated it. In case you didn't know, Nat King Cole isn't just a singer, he's also a piano player. pretty sure it's him playing right now.
Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played on a penny arcade. It's a Barnum and Bailey world, just as phony as it can be. But it wouldn't be make-believe if you believe in me.
Cole, It's Only a Paper Moon. As I said, one of many great versions of that song, but the version I chose to include today. If you don't know Nat King Cole's music, do check him out, because he's one of those artists that I think many people now only listen to at Christmas, because he has a great Christmas album. And that, he definitely does have a great Christmas album, but that's because he's a great artist and he's got loads of other great music which can be played in the other 11 months of the year. Alright, Elvis, kind of an obvious thing for the 50s, although I find actually most of Elvis's most well-known songs came out in the 60s, early 60s. So choosing a song for the 50s, it's more slim pickings in my opinion. But I went with this one. This is Don't. Still a very well-known song by Elvis. I think got to number one. It is backed by the backing singers, backing band, the Jordanaires, who are pictured here, looking slightly unsure. And this, I find this song, it sounds like it actually could have been written far more recently. I can imagine if it had a pop song arrangement, it could actually be a modern song. If you got rid of the backing vocals, which are very like 50s typical, the melody and chords actually would work quite well in a modern pop song. Maybe you'll hear what I mean in a minute. And this song was written by Lieber and Stoller, who were the legendary songwriting duo who wrote many of Elvis's most well-known songs. But anyway, let's have a listen to this. This is Don't by Elvis Presley. See if you can hear what I mean. Imagine just the chords and melody in a pop setting. I think it could be a modern pop song.
Don't. That's what you say each time that I hold you this way. When I feel like this and I want to kiss.
When I say modern pop song, by the way, it wouldn't be like an Ariana Grande. It would be a Ed Sheeran or Adele, like easy listening sort of thing.
Don't leave my embrace, for here in my arms is your place.
Rad Brains is mentioning a song in the chat, Rubbernecking by Elvis. I don't know that song.
And I want to hold you, baby. Don't say don't. If you think that this is just a game I'm playing, if you think that I don't mean every word I'm saying,
chat talking about how back then, the 50s, rock and roll was seen as very... there was a moral panic around rock and roll music, which is quite hard to believe now, but it's the same thing that happens pretty much every 10 years with whatever type of new music there is, be it metal or hip-hop or whatever. TikTok is probably the new moral panic or something like that. But I know that when Elvis first came out and he had songs like Hound Dog, and he was sort of dancing in this sort of manic way, throwing his hips back and forth, it was seen as overly sexual, particularly when it was all marketed at a young audience, a teenage audience. He was nicknamed Elvis the Pelvis, and they had to kind of defang him to continue his career, like people are mentioning here. And one of the ways they did that is they got him to sing Hound Dog on TV to a hound dog, to sort of make it seem more like the song was simply about a dog, not a person. Now, of course, Hound Dog was originally by Big Mama Thornton. It was a black R&B record, but that, I imagine, was so unapproachable for most white audiences that was completely off the radar. So when Elvis pulled it onto their radar with his actually less aggressive version, they just didn't know what to do with it. And fair enough, it was 56, they hadn't heard anything like that before, but amazing how so often something comes along and people think it's going to destroy culture, and then it just becomes culture, and then no one ever seems to learn that lesson. No one ever seems to remember that the panic they're experiencing now about the new thing is the same panic that was felt about the old thing. But anyway, that's rock and roll in the 50s for you. It was a passing fad. People used to ask the Beatles, how long do you think you got left? And they would answer quite earnestly, maybe a few years. They didn't believe, even the Beatles themselves didn't think that what they were doing would last as long as it has. Anyway, another rock and roll 50s classic, Eddie Cochran, known for various tunes, but this is his most well known, Summertime Blues. There's a lyric in this, take your problem to the United Nations, that seems to get quoted in so many other songs. I know there's a PJ Harvey song that quotes it. There was a song I was listening to literally just a couple of days ago that quoted it. It's just a really good, distinctive line. And it was also quite fun to think that when Eddie Cochran wrote this, the United Nations was quite a new concept. But anyway, if anyone doesn't know this song, I'll be surprised. This is a real rock and roll staple, but this is Summertime Blues, Eddie Cochran.
I'm gonna raise a fuss, I'm gonna raise a holler about a working all summer just to try to earn $1. Every time I call my baby, try to get a date, my boss says, no die, son, you gotta work late. Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues. Oh, well, my mom and papa told me, son, you gotta make some money. If you wanna use the car to go a ride next Sunday. Oh, well, I didn't go to work, told the boss I was sick. Now you can't use a car cause you didn't work a leg. Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues. I'm gonna take 2 weeks, gonna have a fine vacation. I'm gonna take my problem to the United Nations. Well, I called my congressman and he said, quote, I'd like to help you, son, but you're too young to vote. Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues.
Summertime Blues, Eddie Cochran. It was so much the case back then that songs could just be really simple. And how long was that? That was 2 minutes long, and it was literally the same thing. I can't remember, either 3 or 4 times, but that's all you needed. And I guess the single would end, and you'd move the needle back to the beginning and just listen to it again. Simple but classic, and that song very much inspired many of the artists that would come later. I also like that it's not a 12-bar blues. It's it's still chords 1, 4, and 5, but it just gives it a bit more of a unique flavour that it's not another 12-bar blues, because so much music is 12-bar blues at this time, be it rock and roll, be it actual blues music, electric blues, that sort of thing, be it jazz. There was so much of that 12-bar blues chord progression knocking around. I'm trying to think if this song has 12-bar blues in it. No, I don't think it does. We mentioned this song briefly at the very beginning because this very startling person here was in the card at the very beginning, this card. And this is Screaming Jay Hawkins. If Elvis was controversial at the time, imagine this guy. He's got a snake around him. He is very much he lives up to the screaming part of his name. This song is by far his most well-known song. He did have many other songs as well, which were slightly less outrageous, slightly less in your face. But if anything, I think that was that's the only reason they've not stood the test of time, because they were just kind of like so all right versions of songs. Whereas this was great. You might know this song because of the cover version that Nina Simone did, and also more recently Annie Lennox from Eurythmics. But this is an absolute classic. I cannot believe this song came out in 1956. I Put a Spell on You, Screaming Jay Hawkins.
I put a spell on you. Because you're mine. Stop the things you do. What's up? I ain't lying. Yeah, I can't stand. Woo! No running around. I can't stand. No putting me down. I put a spell on you. Because you're mine. Oh, yeah. Stop the things you do. What's up? I ain't lying. Oh, oh, I love you. I love you. I love you anyhow. I don't care if you don't want me. I'm yours right now. I put a spell on you. Because you're mine.
That was just amazing. Sorry, V2 put it well in the chat there. Really raw, but sounds amazing. Yes. I feel like he gave permission to so many future artists to sing in that sort of way, to sort of scream and go just a bit crazy. I really wonder what his sort of the impact. I don't know much about what the impact of that song was at the time. I imagine that for many particularly white audiences, this song never even reached their ears. Because if you think at this time, it was still, for many, and very much wrongly, of course, but it was still the case that white people wouldn't necessarily listen to black music. That artists like Chuck Berry benefited from the fact that some people didn't realize he was black, because listening to the radio, you don't see many pictures of him, you might not know that he's black. But Screaming Jay Hawkins, he's going full controversial, full scary, full in your face, and I love it. And maybe he just thought, well, if you're not going to listen to me anyway because of the way I look, I may as well just go balls to the wall with that and go and just put a snake around my neck. But yeah, amazing artist. Put a spell on you. And here we are with a recap. Anyone who has not been here for the first hour, I can't believe it's been an hour. This is what we have listened to so far. We started with Rumble, Link Ray, Bebopalula, I Walk the Line, Johnny Cash, Smokestack Lightning, Howling Wolf, Dearest by Buddy Holly, Mr. Sandman, the version by the Chordettes we listened to, It's Only a Paper Moon, Nat King Cole's version, Don't by Elvis Presley and the Jordanaires, Summertime Blues, Eddie Cochran, and we've just listened to the outrageously wonderful I Put a Spell on You by Screamin' Jay Hawkins. That's 1/3 of our list down. Let's move on. Number 20. And here's Mr. Berry himself. We were just talking about him. We've been talking about him quite a lot in the chat. One of the main influences of the early Beatles, Chuck Berry. And it was the Beatles version of Roll Over Beethoven that I first heard, introduced me to the song, as was the case with many of those early Beatles albums where they covered classic R&B songs and rock and roll songs. That was the version I heard first, and then later learned what the original sounded like. This is Chuck Berry had a knack for rewriting the same song various times, not just because they all used the 12-bar blues chord progression, but even the same riffs and arrangements and melodies. He kind of just found a formula that worked and ran with it, and fair enough. But of all of those incarnations of this song that he wrote, I think Roll Over Beethoven is one of his absolute best. Just a perfect example of rock and roll, 12-bar blues, great melody, great energy, great lyrical concept. Roll Over Beethoven.
Local DJ. Yeah, it's a jumping little record I want my jockey to play. Roll over Beethoven, I gotta hear it again today. My temperature rising, the jukebox blowing a fuse. My heart beating rhythm and my soul.
I appreciate it's confusing that it's on the album art. It says Johnny Be Good. This isn't Johnny Be Good. But you could be forgiven for thinking it is because it starts with virtually the same riff. But that's what Chuck Berry did. It wasn't. He used that riff on various songs, not just these two.
A rhythm review. I roll over Beethoven, they're rocking in 2 by 2. Well, if you feel it and like it, go get your lover, then reel and rock it. Roll it over, then move on up. Just a try for further, then reel and rock with. Run another roll over Beethoven. Dig these rhythm and blues. Nothing to lose. Roll over Beethoven, tell Tchaikovsky to do. You know she wiggle like a glowworm, dance like a spinning top. She got a crazy partner, you ought to see him reel and rock. Long as she got a dime, the music won't never stop. I roll over Beethoven, I roll over Beethoven, I roll over Beethoven. Beethoven, roll over Beethoven, dig through the rhythm and blues.
Ride over Beethoven. Chuck Berry. Very, it's amazing how similar that is to Johnny B. Good. It basically is the same song, just with different words and a slightly different melody. And I can see people are making good use of is that the George Harrison one? Yeah, the George Harrison emote I've added. I think George Harrison is the only Beatle you get access to if you're only a follower. If you're a subscriber, you get other Beatles as well. Was the Beatles version sung by George? I didn't know that. That's cool. Anyway, let's move on. So that was Chuck Berry. Now number 19. A band that are probably most well known for this song. The Flamingos. This is one of those songs I think you will recognise, but you may not know the band or the title maybe. Stereo 16 says they've got John I think because Stereo 16 aren't you a subscriber, so you get John because of that. But anyway, this song is a cover version effectively. I mentioned a few songs back that it was really common in the 50s that a song would come out, and if it was popular, loads of artists would cover it and do their own versions, and that means that now 70 years on, the version that has stood the test of time is actually rarely the original. But I do think this is the best version. There was a version of, which is also nice, by Art Garfunkel that came out, I don't know, in the 80s or something. Different vibe. But yeah, this is great. And I think this is although it's late 50s, this is a really good sounding recording for the 50s. Really great arrangement and, production.
My love must be a kind of blind love. I can't see anyone but you. Are the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's cloudy or bright. I only have eyes for the moon may be high, but I can't see a thing in the sky. I only have eyes for I don't know if we're in.
You guys recognise this song? Is this something you knew already before? Maybe you recognised it but you didn't know what it was called. I find that the chorus is the bit which I most recognise. I'm quite familiar with the song now, but back when I didn't know the song as well, it was the chorus where I was like, oh, this song. Proper slow dance. Yes.
You are here, and so am I. Maybe millions of people go by, but they all disappear from view. And I only have eyes for you.
It's a really common thing to do in the 50s. Piano, just those high 18ths, 8th notes. Why did I say 18ths? da, 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 da. It's a really common thing to do on 50s music. Just really effective. I think I remember when I was first playing piano alongside, rock bands. It's often hard to know how to fit into a rock band arrangement as a piano player, because so much of the space is taken up by the guitars and the bass. But that high end where the guitar can't reach is a great place to go, and just eighth notes on those chords works so well. So yeah, that was number 19. I Only Have Eyes for You by the Flamingos. Maybe I've introduced you there to something you didn't know. Number 18. This is another song which I imagine you guys will know, but it's one of those things where with 50s tracks, it's so easy to miss them, even if they're massive 50s tracks, even if they're some of the most well-regarded, best-selling tracks of the decade nowadays. Unless you're putting on your 50s soundtrack, 50s playlists, it's rare that you'd encounter these songs in the wild. Probably the most common time you'd see them is in a film or an advert. But anyway, this is You Send Me, Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke was in our 60s list with Change Is Gonna Come, which is a very different song to this. Most of Sam Cooke's most well-known music came out in the 60s, but his career did begin in the 50s, and one of his first big hits was You Send Me. Just a beautiful song. Let's have a listen. Sam Cooke, You Send Me.
Darling, you send me. I know you send me. Darling, you send me. Honest you do, honest you do, honest you do. Whoa, you thrill me. I know you thrill me. Darling, you thrill me. Honest you do. At first I thought it was infatuation, but ooh, it's lasted so long. Now I find myself wanting to marry you and take you home. Whoa, you send me. I know you send me. I know you send me. Honest you do. Whoa, whenever I'm with you, I know when I'm near.
G-Kex Machina is saying that Steve Miller Band covered this. I think someone else also mentioned that. Guitar Geek mentioned that. I don't know that version. To be honest, I think I only know two songs by Steve Miller Band. The Joker, which is a great song, and what's it called? Abracadabra? Also a good song. Yeah, I don't know. I should listen to some more of those.
Honest you do. At first I thought it was infatuation, but ooh, it's lasted so long. Now I find myself wanting to marry you and take you home. I know you send me. I know you send me. Send me, honest you do.
You Send Me, Sam Cooke. I can see Rad Brains in the chat there asking whether any artists will come up more than once on this list. I've already mentioned Chuck Berry will come up more than once, which I think someone had already mentioned in the chat there. There will be a few others that appear more than once. Probably more double appearances in this list than any other list I've done. Because in other lists, I've really wanted to show as much variety as I possibly could. Even if that meant including an artist at the cost of playing two songs from the same artist. Because, of course, that rule is usually in place to stop one artist completely dominating the list, as they would if the Beatles would dominate the 60s, Radiohead would dominate the 90s or the 2000s or even the 2010s. But with the 50s, as I imagine is the case with you guys, there's less artists, less music I listen to by the 50s, from the 50s, which means there's less music I need to cram into the list, more scope to play one artist more than once. So Chuck Berry, as I said, will be played more than once, and there will be some others that will make double appearances, but I won't give the game away quite yet. But that was Sam Cooke, number 18 on the list. Let's go on to number 17, Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong is such an iconic artist that I think anybody would recognize him and his voice and his music, even if you don't remotely like jazz, even if you were born in the 21st century. I'm sure you still know who Louis Armstrong is. He is truly an icon. This is one of his more early songs. His career started in the late 40s, went right through until the 70s, I think. I don't know when Louis Armstrong died. But some of Louis Armstrong's most well-known songs are actually from the late 60s, like Wonderful World is from the late 60s. We Have All the Time in the World is from the late 60s. It looks like he died in 1971. So yeah, his career literally did last up through the 60s and then just into the 70s. This is a song which originally by a French artist called Edith Piaf, or Piaf. I'm probably saying that wrong. This is a cover version, of course, and I became familiar with this cover version because of the film WALL-E, or WALL-E, the Pixar film about the robot and clearing up all the rubbish. That guy. I can't remember. I think it's in I think it might be the opening scene. Actually, we hear this song, and something I really like about this song, this arrangement of this song, is what's called the white note glissando, which I talked about in one of my videos actually. Which is when you run your hand across the white notes, and because the white notes on the piano are a C major scale, you're effectively climbing up the C major scale really quickly just by running a hand across it. And because this song is in the key of C, it just fits really nicely to have this kind of climb up the major scale at the beginning of the song. Listen out for it. This is La Vie en Rose by Louis Armstrong. There it is. Running the finger across the keys. It's been pointed out in the comments. Melodia, you're correct. Louis Armstrong's career did start much earlier than 1950, actually. I didn't realise how long his career has been. He was recording as early as the 20s.
Hold me close and hold me fast. The magic spell you cast. This is La Vie en Rose.
Mungo Bungo, thank you so much for subscribing. You can now make use of those special exclusive emotes.
And though I close my eyes, I see La Vie en Rose. When you press me to your heart, and in a world apart.
Thank you, Laura, for identifying that I have had a haircut. Don't know if anyone else noticed that.
And when you speak, angels sing from above. Everyday word seems to turn into love song. Give your heart and soul to me, and life will always be la vie en rose.
I think this is the earliest song on this list today, 1950. Literally just getting into the right decade. I'm going to talk over the end. But what I wanted to mention is, as I said, it was one of the earliest songs in this list. It must be the earliest song in this list, 1950. You can really hear that 1940s sound, that sort of big band, almost like Glenn Miller, Duke Ellington sound, still hanging around. Later, as we get into the 50s, jazz got into more upbeat territory, into swing territory, which we'll hear from some of the other artists we'll be listening to in this list. We already heard from Nat King Cole, actually. That very swing sort of sound that sort of was so typical in the 50s. Anyway, that's La Vie en Rose by Louis Armstrong, or at least his version of it. Let's move on. Here we are. We're just talking about swing. Here is a perfect example of that. Almost 10 years later, Ella Fitzgerald, an artist who collaborated with Louis Armstrong on many occasions. Not on this particular track, though. This is Blue Skies, one of my favourite American songbook tunes. I was mentioning earlier when I was talking about Nat King Cole that there is this thing called the American Songbook, which is an unofficial collection of classic jazz standards, which were all popularised and originally introduced in Broadway musicals and sometimes also films. But they then went on to be covered, performed, interpreted by so many other musicians, largely jazz musicians, that it almost became irrelevant who the original version was by. It was like everyone had their own version. And it's the same here with Blue Skies. This Blue Skies is written by Irving Berlin, who is one of the great writers, one of the great contributors to the Great American Songbook. Irving Berlin wrote Putting on the Ritz. He wrote White Christmas, of course, one of the most well-known songs of all time. What else did Irving Berlin write? He wrote, it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember. I'll look it up in a second. But anyway, he wrote this, I believe, for a musical that someone else was writing. I think Rodgers and Hart were writing a musical. They needed another song, so Irving Berlin stepped in and added this one. It's a great upbeat song. It's got a really interesting chord progression in the bridge section where it goes 1 to minor 4 back and forth. And I have a theory that Irving Berlin, who was he was Jewish. I say natively, of course he was just Jewish. That was it. And his actual name was something like Israel or something, which he had he used Irving Berlin instead to avoid any sort of anti-Semitic sentiment. Yeah, his birth name was Israel Balin, not Irving Berlin. The reason I mentioned that he was Jewish is because that in popular, Jewish traditional songs like Hava Nagila or Simon Tov and Mazel Tov, there's often this move from the one chord, like for example C major, to F minor, the minor 4 chord. That seems to be a really typical thing in Jewish traditional music, and it's exactly what happens in the bridge of Blue Skies. So I think that is Irving Berlin's Jewish tradition, Jewish heritage being heard in his songwriting. But anyway, without any further ado, this is Blue Skies as performed by Ella Fitzgerald. Cheek to Cheek, yes. Irving Berlin wrote Cheek to Cheek. Well done, G-Kex Machina.
Blue skies smiling at me, nothing but blue skies do I see.
Laura's asking about Be Near Bis the Shin. I've said that wrong. Which is another traditional Jewish song. I think the most famous version of that is by the... What are they called? The Summit Sisters. Andrew Sisters. And that would have been the 40s, not 50s. But great song.
When you're in love, my how they fly. Blue days, all of them gone. Nothing but blue skies from now on.
Actually, I've just looked up when Andrew Sisters did Be Mir Bis Shem. Actually came out in 1937, so it was the 30s. But I won't be doing a top 30 songs of the 1930s. Also, isn't it mental that in less than 7 years' time we'll be in the 30s again? Isn't that just crazy? Also, if you hadn't noticed, Ella Fitzgerald is very well known for scatting. She's incredibly good at it. Basically just doing an impression of what a trumpet would be doing at this point. But just listen to the intricacy and melodic ability and the creativity. Oh, it's just crazy, her scatting. That was a quote. She literally just quoted Rhapsody in Blue.
Shining so bright, never saw things going oh so right. Noticing the days hurrying by, when you're in love, my heart may fly. Blue days, all of them gone, not but blue skies from now on.
Blue Skies, Ella Fitzgerald. As I was saying before, that's a classic song from the American Songbook, which is a kind of informal collection of songs from old Broadway plays and movies. I'm just also trying to Google Blue Skies at the same time as talking to you, and I literally just typed in Blue Skies, forgetting that, of course, they wouldn't, Google wouldn't know I'm talking about the song. So instead, it just showed me a bunch of pictures of blue skies. But yes, the reason I wanted to Google it is to find out when it was originally written. Blue Skies was originally written in 1926. That's how old it is. So when Ella was covering it here in 1959, the song was almost 25 years old. So it was like if, like right now, I covered, I don't know, like an Oasis song, like Wonderwall. It was like that. It was like that. It was already a standard. It was already very well known. But Ella actually, particularly in the late 50s, she did entire albums of covers of these great American songbooks. She actually worked her way through each of the writers. She did like an album of George Gershwin songs. She did an album of Rodgers and Hart, of Harold Arlen, of all of the great writers. And I imagine this must have come from her Irving Berlin album, who was the great songwriter who wrote Blue Skies. Also, I mentioned, I will move on in a second, but I mentioned that Irving Berlin wrote White Christmas, which is arguably one of the most well-known songs of all time. Of course, first interesting fact, he was Jewish, writing a very well-known Christmas song. He also wrote White Christmas in the middle of summer, I believe, and it was written in a place I've been to, and it's a beautiful place called La Quinta, which is just outside of Palm Springs in California, which is about an hour, 2 hours south of LA. So as you can imagine, hot, deserty, palm trees everywhere. Perfect place to write White Christmas. But that's kind of what White Christmas is about. It's about like wanting to be in a colder place with snow and having a white Christmas instead of a baking hot Christmas. But anyway, let's move on from that. Irving Berlin, I could talk about him all day. But anyway, this is a recap of everything we've listened to so far. This is, if anyone's still here from Rumble, Link Ray, anyone was around to listen to that, which was now an hour and a half ago. Just having a look in the chat. Kieran, Christ, day late and a dollar short here. I feel like I missed something. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. So Kieran thought I was going forward. Yeah, you've arrived at the very end of this project, I'm afraid. But you can still recap. You can rewatch all of these streams I've done on my second YouTube channel. So I started with the 2010s and I've been working back each week. I'm now at the 50s, as you can see. Not going to go to the 40s. I doubt I could even find 30 songs I know from the 40s, let alone my sort of top 30. I'm going to circle around next week and do the 2020s, which of course we're only a third of the way through, but I still want to tell you about some of my favourite music from the last 4 years or 3 years. No, 4 years, because the year 2020 counts as a 20s. And also there will be future lists on, there'll be a list on my favourite songs by the Beatles. That's coming up as well. You can find out about all of this in the schedule on my Twitch channel. But anyway, that's the recap. Let's keep moving. We're halfway through now. Number 15 on the list, and it's the Crickets. So this is basically Buddy Holly making a second appearance. We mentioned before that a handful of artists will make 2 appearances. Buddy Holly started, of course, as the singer of the Crickets. And in case you missed the factoid earlier, it was the Crickets which inspired the Beatles to have their name. Crickets, insects, Beatles, insects, etc. This is Maybe Baby by the Crickets. I'm sure you guys know this. If you don't, let me know in the chat because I'm really surprised. But probably one of the most well-known songs by the Crickets.
Maybe, baby, I'll have you. Maybe, baby, you'll be true. Maybe, baby, I'll have you for me. It's funny, honey, you don't care. You never listen to my prayer. Maybe, baby, you will love me someday. Well, you are the one that makes me glad, and you are the one that makes me sad. When someday you want me, well, I'll be there, wait and see. Maybe, baby, I'll have you. Maybe, baby, you'll be true. Maybe, baby, I'll have you for me. Well, you are the one that makes me glad, and you are the one that makes me sad. When someday you want me, well, I'll be there, wait and see. Maybe, baby, I'll have you. Maybe, baby, you'll be true. Maybe, baby, I'll have you for me.
Silaglad or Silaglad. As we've noticed that on this record here on screen it says vocal group with orchestra. I couldn't hear an orchestra either. I don't know if that's inaccurate or this is a different version, this record sleeve. I don't know. But anyway, that was Maybe Baby by the Crickets, released 1957. Even though this says 1958. I'm pretty sure it came out in 57. As I mentioned when we listened to the other Buddy Holly song that we had earlier, the song Dearest, which we listened to about an hour ago, Buddy Holly had a tragically short career being killed in an air crash in '59. But yeah, we're still talking about him now. He only made only made recordings for about 3 years, and I'm sure we'll still be listening to them in many years to come. All right, another song that has been covered by many different artists. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. I think the first version of this I encountered was by Brian Ferry, the singer from Roxy Music. He went through a bit of a phase of recording kind of American songbook classics, and his version's cool. But this is the most well-known version, I believe. This song has been covered by many different people, but the Platters version was like a big hit around the world when it came out, and I think it is one of the best versions of this song. Really beautiful arrangement, and I sometimes used to play this song in my piano repertoire. Actually, I haven't played it for a while. I should reintroduce it. I remember I first introduced it because once I was playing in a restaurant, and the fire alarms went off because someone had burnt something, and one of the guests suggested that one of the customers suggested that I should play Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. So it's all fun and games when no one dies. Anyway, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, the Platters.
They ask me how I knew my true love was true. I replied, something here inside cannot be denied. Said someday you'll find all who love are blind. Oh, when your heart's on fire, you must realize smoke gets in your eyes. I chaffed them and I gaily laughed to think they could doubt my love. Yet today my love has flown away. I am without my friends deride, tears I cannot hide. So I smile and say, when a lovely flame dies, smoke gets in your eyes. Smoke gets in your eyes. Smoke gets in your eyes.
Very cinematic at the end there, very dramatic. But I like it. It's I think when anything's like that, it runs the risk of being melodramatic and sort of sounding cheesy. But I think it stays on the side of genuinely quite emotionally stirring, really. I love it. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Although that is one of those songs that where the bridge in the middle, the bit where I said it changed key, is like, is this bit going to end? Because we want to get back to the good bit. Particularly because the song's so slow as well. The bridge just seems to go on forever. But there you go. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, The Platters. Let's move on to number 13. This is a song I discovered because of the film Pulp Fiction. It's not particularly noticeable when you're watching Pulp Fiction. It's there in the background. in the scene where Vincent Vega and Mia Farrow's character, I can't remember what she's called, they go to the diner and they first sit down and they order their food. This song is playing in the background in the restaurant. But, you know, of course I didn't notice it then, but I later had the Pulp Fiction soundtrack on CD because it's got loads of great songs in it. And that's where I found Lonesome Town, which is a great piece of music. I don't particularly know anything else by Ricky Nelson, but this is a great song. Be interested to know if you guys recognize this. This is Lonesome Town.
There's a place where lovers go to cry their troubles away, and they call it Lonesome Town, where the broken hearts stay. You can buy a dream or two to last you all through the years, and the only price you pay is a heart full of tears. Going down to Lonesome Town, where the broken hearts stay. Going down to Lonesome Town to cry my troubles away. In the town of broken dreams, the streets are filled with regret. Maybe down in Lonesome Town I can learn to forget. Maybe down in Lonesome Town I can learn to forget.
Lonesome Town, Ricky Nelson. As is the case with many of the songs on this list, it was a particularly simple song. I think you might notice, Stephen. Not only being short, but like kind of just being the same thing a few different times. I think it just was very typical at the time for a song to ultimately just be 1 minute of unique music and then that repeated. But to be honest, you could say the same for modern pop music. But it's certainly a contrast to, you know, the 1970s stream we did, where we had 10-minute epics where we went on an entire journey and there was different things going on in every different moment of the song. It's amazing how much music changed in the space of less than 20 years, really. The 50s to the 70s, you know, even the 1958 here to 1968, wild levels of innovation compared to, you know, 2010 to 2020. Not to say that music didn't change between 2010 and 2020, but nowhere near the scale of what happened in the 60s and 70s. And I think it's because the medium of recorded music came of age. Like I mentioned before, even still at the 50s, it was almost like recorded music was seen as documenting a live performance in the same way that early movies kind of documented what you could have just put on a stage, you know, a play. It was only when the medium had existed for a couple of decades that people started thinking, wait, we could treat this as a medium in its own right and do some more interesting things with it, which is what we see in, you know, the second half of the 60s with artists like the Beach Boys and the Beatles getting creative. But anyway, let's move on. Number 12. The Everly Brothers. We mentioned them right at the beginning because they were on that card I showed at the beginning. I feel like the Everly Brothers are one of those artists that they have 4 or 5 songs that everyone has heard, probably because they've been used in some TV show or an advert or something. But they've got some great music. I can't remember their names, but most of their songs, including this one, were written by this husband and wife duo who wrote loads of country music. So yeah, the Everly Brothers didn't write their own songs, but they were very good at singing them, and beautiful harmonies. The Everly Brothers were a big inspiration actually on the Beatles from a vocal harmony perspective, and an even bigger influence on Simon and Garfunkel. If you look at some of the early pictures of Simon and Garfunkel, particularly when Simon and Garfunkel went by the name Tom and Jerry, and yes, that was their original name, they basically styled themselves on the Everly Brothers before they sort of got their own identity. But anyway, let's have a listen to this. Bye Bye Love, Everly Brothers.
Bye bye love, bye bye happiness, hello loneliness, I think I'm gonna cry. Bye bye love, bye bye sweet caress, hello emptiness, I feel like I could die. Bye bye my love, goodbye. There goes my baby with someone new. She sure looks happy, I sure am blue. She was my baby till he stepped in. Goodbye to romance, that might have been. Bye bye love, bye bye happiness, hello loneliness, I think I'm gonna cry. Bye bye love, bye bye sweet caress, hello emptiness, I feel like I could die. Bye bye my love, goodbye. I'm through with romance, I'm through with love, I'm through with counting the stars above. And here's the reason that I'm so free. My loving baby is through with me. Bye bye love, bye bye happiness, hello loneliness, I think I'm gonna cry. Bye bye love, bye bye sweet caress, hello emptiness, I feel like I could die. Bye bye my love, goodbye. Bye bye my love, goodbye. Bye bye my love, goodbye.
Bye Bye Love, the Everly Brothers. I think Major Dolphin in the chat there, Felice and how do you pronounce that name? Boudelaire Bryant were the husband and wife songwriting duo that I was talking about, who wrote many of the Everly Brothers' well-known songs, including songs for other artists as well. At some point I want to do a video actually on some of these songwriters who wrote loads and loads of well-known songs, but no one really knows about them, or at least no one knows about them unless they're a music nerd. Because so often, particularly in the 50s, but I think in all eras of music, there's an effort made to hide the fact that the song wasn't written by the artist. It sort of takes away some of the authenticity, I guess, even though most people know that, I don't know, Britney Spears didn't write her own songs. But there's an extra level of authenticity when you kind of are allowed to forget that there was a songwriter there. And same with Elvis. Like, Elvis didn't write his own songs. I don't know if Elvis ever wrote any songs. If he did, they weren't the big hits. But if we kind of forget that he didn't, it kind of makes him seem more authentic. And for some reason, people love authenticity in music. All right, this is probably one of the deepest cuts, the most unusual, unknown songs on this list. It's a song called Jim. It wasn't written by Sarah Vaughan, but this is the only version of it I know. Sarah Vaughan is a great jazz and swing singer, very similar to Ella Fitzgerald, but maybe doesn't get talked about quite as much. And Clifford Brown, famous in his own right as a trumpet player. Jim, this version of Jim happens to be from a record that Sarah Vaughan did with Clifford Brown. You will hear him on the record during, doing his trumpet solo. I just think this is a beautiful song, really well arranged as well. Listen out for the beginning and the end where there's this great harmony struck between the vocal and the rest of the arrangement. Just the texture is just really lush. This is Jim by Sarah Vaughan.
Doesn't ever bring me pretty flowers. Jim never tries to cheer my lonely hours. Don't know why I'm so crazy for Jim. Jim never tells me I'm his heart's desire. I never seem to set his love afire. Gone are the years I've wasted on him. Sometimes when I get feeling low, I say let's call it quits. Then
Abdujaparov, maybe? Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. First of all, thank you for joining the chat. They've mentioned that this song reminds them of the song The Nearness of You, which is actually a song that almost made this list. Billie Holiday's version of it I almost included in this list. The Nearness of You is a beautiful jazz standard jazz ballad that's been performed by many artists. I think a lot of people know it because of Nora Jones' version, which was included on her debut album, Come Away With Me, which, taking it a bit of a tangent, Come Away With Me by Nora Jones, although was very mainstream and sort of easy to, turn your nose up at, is a great album, beautiful album. But anyway, Nearness of You, it's just a very similar vibe, isn't it? Jazz ballad, sung by a beautiful female voice. But yeah, Jim is a far less well-known song, I would say. And here's Clifford Brown. Sometimes when I get feeling low, I say, let's call it quits.
then I hang on, let him go, breaking my heart in bed.
I Am the Egg Pod, great name.
Someday I know.
They said this would, they said, who wouldn't dream of ending up in a smoky, out-of-the-way venue listening to this? I know exactly what you mean. It's definitely got that vibe of just relaxing into a chair, sipping on some bourbon in the early hours. I used to play a gig, a residency in London at this cocktail bar at this fancy hotel. There's me and a sax player, and it was very much the place that you're imagining. People would just wander in and we'd play them some sort of music like this. The thing is, though, so few people would wander in that sometimes we were playing to no one, so we would just take it as a chance to spend 25 minutes jamming. Pretty good gig. Anyway, that was Sarah Vaughan and Clifford Brown with Jim. And with that, it takes us to our penultimate recap. So this is all of the songs that we've listened to so far. Congratulations to anybody who has been here since the start. We've now been doing this for almost 2 hours. Although we're making better progress than usual because these songs are so short. The 70s, best of the 70s stream we did was so long. It was like 4 hours long because of all of those long songs. But anyway, these are the songs we've listened to so far. Rumble, Bebopaloola, I Walk the Line, Smokes Like Lightning, Dearest, Mr. Sandman, Only Paper Moon, Don't, Sometime Blues, Put a Spell on You, Roll Over Beethoven, Only Have Eyes for You, You Send Me, La Vie en Rose, Blue Skies, Maybe Baby, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Lonesome Town, Bye Bye Love, and Jim. And that takes us into the top 10. These ones here. Really going to get into the juicy ones here. And here, we've only just finished listening to one of them. Here's another entry from the Everly Brothers. As I mentioned before, some artists can appear twice. No one can appear more than twice. But as long as they're from different albums, I can include the same artist more than once. And on this particular list, I've done that quite a few times, actually. This is a beautiful song. Once again written by that same husband and wife songwriting duo, whose names I've forgotten. They wrote pretty much all of the Everly Brothers' well-known songs. I love the tremolo guitar effect on this song. It's so, well, pun intended, dreamy. This is All I Have to Do Is Dream.
Dream, 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 dream. Dream, dream, dream when I want you in my arms, when I want you, and all your charms whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream. Dream, dream, dream when I feel blue in the night and I need you to hold me tight whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream. I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine, anytime, night or day. Only trouble is, gee whiz, I'm dreaming my life away. I need you so that I could die. I love you so, and that is why whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream. Dream, 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 dream. I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine, anytime, night or day. Only trouble is, gee whiz, I'm dreaming my life away. I need you so that I could die. dream, 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 dream.
All I have to do is dream. Everly Brothers. Beautiful song. Oscar was asking if the Everly Brothers have any more well-known songs beyond the two that we've listened to in the stream. Wake Up Little Susie is a really well-known song by them. Kathy's Clown is also a great one. And beyond that, they do have some other well-known songs as well, some other great ones. The two that we've listened to, though, are particularly well-known by them. But for good reason. Anyway, number 9. Mr. Berry is back. We had Roll Over Beethoven. There was lots of speculation earlier about whether Johnny Be Good would be on this list. Well, this is actually the confirmation that it won't be, because no artist can appear on these lists more than twice. So this is the second entry by Chuck Berry. And I think this song is really interesting. I was saying earlier how Chuck Berry had a habit of kind of rewriting the same song. Like he had a couple little formulas and he'd spin them out various times with very little difference and yet have more hits. I guess it was the early days of rock and roll, early days of pop music, so people didn't really mind that stuff. People accuse pop music of sounding samey today. It didn't sound the samey as Roll Over Beethoven versus Johnny Be Good, which are basically the same song. But this is quite a different Chuck Berry song. This is quite different from anything else he wrote. It doesn't even really sound like Chuck Berry, in my opinion, to the point that when I first heard this song, I thought it was a Beatles song. Now, the Beatles did do a cover of this song on their live on the BBC sessions, and they also, I imagine, played it in their set when they were playing in Hamburg, back when they were the Cavern Club band, etc. But the version I first got of this song was from LimeWire, that dodgy website, software, whatever it was, where you could download MP3s illegally instead of paying for them. And something that used to happen on LimeWire, for some reason, I don't know why it happened, is that songs would be mislabeled. So I downloaded Memphis, Tennessee, thinking, well, it was labelled Memphis, Tennessee by the Beatles, but it wasn't. It was the Chuck Berry version. So I thought it was a Beatles song. But maybe you can hear why I would think that. Not just because the Beatles did cover this song, but I think the Beatles took some influence from this song, from the melody style, from the bass playing. It sounds like it could be an early Beatles song. This is Memphis, Tennessee, Chuck Berry.
Long distance information, give me Memphis, Tennessee. Help me find the party, try to get in touch with me. She could not leave her number, but I know who placed the call. 'Cause my uncle took the message and he wrote it on the wall. Help me information, get in touch with my Marie. She's the only one who'd phone me here from Memphis, Tennessee. Her home is on the south side, high up on a ridge, just a half a mile from the Mississippi Bridge.
I'm wondering if any of you watching aren't currently following me on Twitch, aren't set to be following, because I just noticed we're only 10 off 800, which would be pretty cool. And as of today, a perk you get if you follow me is like these unique emote things, like emojis or something. I'll show you what they look like in the chat right now.
All the fun we had, but we were pulled apart because her mom did not agree and tore apart our happy home in Memphis, Tennessee.
They look like that. If you look in the chat, I now have a whole bunch. Oh yeah, EK Crisp is thrown in some as well. But yeah, if there are 10 people watching who aren't followers, hit follow and we'll get to the 800 mark.
Marie is only 6 years old. Information, please. Try to put me through to her in Memphis, Tennessee.
Good to see those emotes getting you some use. There's a whole variety of them. some music theory ones, some of me, lots of Beatles ones. No, I was about to give you a clue. I was about to give you a clue about what was number one, but I'm not going to say it. But I will say a little bit of a clue. A little bit of the clue is that one of the emotes is very relevant to the number one song. But it's an emote that's only available to subscribers. So only subscribers will get that clue. Anyway, moving on. Louis Prima. We were talking about Louis Prima now 2 hours ago because he was on that card at the beginning, that grid of all the artists. Louis Prima is an artist who I didn't know anything about for a very long time. And then I did a gig with a band called the Jive Aces who play jive music, which is a kind of type of swing music. Basically the type of music that Louis Prima plays. It's like a hybrid between rock and roll and swing, and maybe some other stuff thrown in there. This is one of Louis Prima's most well-known songs. It's not an original. It's actually a medley of two already existent songs, Just a Gigolo and I Ain't Got No Body. And what he literally does is he plays Just a Gigolo and then segues into I Ain't Got No Body, but it kind of becomes quite seamless. It sounds like one cohesive song. It sounds like it was written that way. Now, if you weren't here at the beginning, you wouldn't have heard this fun fact that I mentioned before, which is that Louis Prima was the voice of King Louis in Jungle Book. And he, of course, sang King of the Swingers, which is the song, the monkey song in Jungle Book. So maybe that's how his most well-known song to this date is King of the Swingers. But I think he's a great artist. He's got it's really feel-good music. It's very energetic. You can feel the live energy of his performance coming through in the recording. It's very much a live performance captured brilliantly as a recording. So this is Just a Gigolo, I Ain't Got No Body by Louis Prima.
And just a gigolo, and everywhere I go, people know the part I'm playing. Paid for every dance, selling its romance. Oh, what they say. There will come a day, and youth will pass away. What will they say about me? When the end comes, I know they'll say just a gigolos. Life goes on without me. And just a gigolo, everywhere I go, people know the part I'm playing. Paid for every dance, selling each romance. Oh, what they say. And there will come a day, and youth will pass away. What will they say about me? When the end comes, I know there's just a gigolos. Life goes on without me.
Now,
I ain't got nobody.
This is the other song now.
Oh, and there's nobody cares for me. There's nobody cares for me. I'm so sad and lonely. Sad and lonely, sad and lonely. Want some sweet mama? Come take a chance with me, 'cause I ain't so bad. And I'll sing her sweet love song. I love the time. She will only be Baldi Bozi Bat Blib Up. I ain't got nobody.
I just love the gear changes in the song. It's like it just keeps changing dynamic, keeps the energy coming.
For me, there's nobody cares for me. Nobody cares for me. mangole baby, hunkily belly, bazunkily boat. I ain't got nobody. Nobody that cares for me. There's nobody that cares for me. I'm so sad and lonely. Oh, lonely. Want some sweet mama come and rescue me, 'cause I ain't so bad. And I sing up, we love song all of the time. She will only be, only, baby, how much sugar, darling, I ain't got nobody, baby, and there's nobody, there's nobody, there's no one, Gurnish, stasera, over there, nobody, nobody cares for me.
Just a gigolo. I ain't got nobody. Louis Prima. Great energy. Love that song so much. That might not be the last you see of Louis Prima on this list. Also good to see all of the emotes getting good use in the chat. I didn't realise that you could add extra things to them. I don't actually know how to do that, but I can see people have been putting sunglasses on them. They've been adding hands to them. Unrelated, but did you hear about 8-Bit Music Theory's reference to you in a video? Yes. Well, I know he referenced me in a video about modes a while ago when he was suggesting that I would file a cease and desist against him for talking about modes because I talked about modes. Is that the reference you mean, or is there a more recent video that he has mentioned me in? But 8-Bit's great. If anyone here likes music theory and likes video game music, 8-Bit Music Theory is exactly where you need to go. I'm not actually that familiar with video game music because apart from Pokemon and Mario, which I used to play back in the day, I don't really play any video games now. But I still find his videos really interesting because it's just a really great presentation. He's really good at explaining stuff. Great channel. Yeah, well, Stereo 16 is saying, glad to see you've become a staple in the music theory scene. It's weird. It's weird because I always used to watch these people. Before I made videos on YouTube, I used to watch 8-Bit Music Theory. I used to watch Adam Neely. I used to watch 12 Tone and Nare Soul and David Bruce and Amy Nolte and Rick Beato and all these people. The fact now that I have met many of them, that I've worked with many of them, 8-Bit Music Theory I've collaborated with online, and that my channel has somehow surpassed many of them in subscribers, it still feels surreal to me. I don't feel like I belong there. I was thinking the other day, actually, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think my channel was the most subscribed music theory channel in the UK. Because I can't think of any other music theory YouTuber in the UK that has more subs than me. Of course, music theory is a very small niche on YouTube. There's probably less than 100 channels talking about it. But still, that just kind of shocked me recently. Better TV. So I was just seeing in the chat, UK Crisp, EK Crisp, not UK Crisp. It's mentioned Better TV or Better TTTV for getting emotes for Twitch. Interesting. I'll have to check that out. Oh, I think I've heard of this. Okay, cool. Anyway, I'll look into that. But anyway, still find the YouTube channel thing crazy. The fact that it's kind of closing in on 1 million subs, which is absurd. Like 100,000 is definitely the, when you get the silver plaque, it's like, okay, now it's like YouTube saying you are now a YouTuber. You have the silver plaque, and that was amazing. But then you don't get any other plaque or anything until 1 million. And it's like if you get 1 million, it's like you're not just a YouTuber now, you're like a big YouTuber. And that's crazy that my channel was kind of on its way there. It's still a while off, but possibly within the next 12 months, if it goes at the same rate it's going now, we could be... It's crazy. I'll definitely be making all sorts of live streams and videos celebrating that. So if you've got any ideas for how I can mark that milestone, if I'm lucky enough to reach it, then let me know. But anyway, let's move on with what we're doing here. That was number 8. Number 7, John Coltrane. We were talking about John Coltrane in the last stream, in the 60s stream, talking about his song, now I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Naime. I think that's how it's pronounced. Sorry, I got hay fever. Which was a beautiful ballad. This is not a ballad. This is far more upbeat. This is an example of what you might call hard bop, which is like bebop, but with more focus on the drums and the driving force. It's almost like a crossbreed of bebop and R&B, rock and roll sort of stuff. I don't know. Anyway, if you've not listened to John Coltrane is one of the greatest jazz musicians ever. Jazz kind of quite neatly fits into 2 eras, in my opinion. You've got I don't know how far back you want to go, but let's say like 1910s through to 1955, and that was like the era of mainstream jazz, where jazz was pop music. It was like the music you'd hear when you turn on the radio, and you had swing, you had big band, what people would call trad jazz. But then in the mid-50s, because of rock and roll, because of this new type of music, like Chuck Berry and all those guys coming along, it kind of started replacing jazz. And jazz started becoming a more niche style of music. And at the same time, it started becoming more experimental and long form and free form and out there. And that's when you had artists like John Coltrane and Miles Davis pushing the genre. So this is when you get into that type of jazz. You get into that type of jazz where it starts becoming a little bit more dense. I think it's the type of jazz people think of when they think of jazz. They think, oh, that dense type of music that I can't get into. That's only for nerds and aficionados. That's where we're getting now with John Coltrane. But I implore you to give it a chance because it can be dense. This song is 10 minutes long. We're not going to listen to the whole thing. And it's 10 minutes, and there's not really much changing in those 10 minutes. It's like 10 minutes of John Coltrane exploring what he can do over a repeating 32-bar form. So it's not like there's some massive epic thing about to happen, like Stairway to Heaven or something. But yeah, you can get a lot out of jazz if you know where to look, and a good place to look is John Coltrane. So let's listen to this. This is Blue Train by John Coltrane. I thought if there's going to be an opportunity to go to the toilet, it's going to be during John Coltrane. No, no shade on Coltrane, but this is a 10-minute piece of music, whereas every other piece of music in this playlist is about 2 minutes long. But as I mentioned before, we won't necessarily listen to the whole thing. If you want to listen to Coltrane, Blue Train, which is the album this track's from, it's a great place to start. Also, I would recommend Giant Steps, which is an album that came out in the 60s, which was on my previous list. So let's listen to a little bit more, and then we'll move on. Oliver Nelson, Stolen Moments. I've never heard of that. EK Crisp was asking whether that was on the 60s list. I don't even know what that is. In case you're less familiar with jazz, particularly this sort of era of jazz, I guess, this, like so many John Coltrane pieces, like so many bebop songs, is an example of what's called a head arrangement, where at the beginning we got what's called the head, which is the main melody, the recognisable bit, and then what happens after that is we then repeat that same chord progression that we heard in the head on a loop, but then we work our way through all of the different musicians in the band, and they all get their opportunity to sort of solo over it. So that's where the variety comes from. It's like we're repeating the exact same chord progression, but each musician is then taking their own opportunity to put a spin on it and explore it. But it's very much a sense of exploration. It's like, what can you discover? What can you find and pull out of this chord progression and this vibe? And you can feel how each of these musicians is adding something new to it. And of course, they're all improvising as well. This wasn't written down, almost exclusively improvising, which is why artists like John Coltrane were able to record multiple albums in a year, each with songs this length, of like 10 minutes length, because it's, when you improvise, you can write it at the same time as recording it. Anyway, let's have a little bit more listen, and then we will move on, because I know what's next on the list, and it's also quite long. Yeah, let's wrap this up. Let's move on. I love Blue Train. It's at number 7. Of course I love it. Oh, here comes the piano solo. No, we're going to move on. Still got 3 minutes. You could fit in 2 other songs on this list in the time we've got left on this song. If you like what you hear, go check out Coltrane. But anyway, that's John Coltrane. And now we'll move on to number 6, which, as I kind of hinted just then, is also very long, because it's the same breed of thing, although a bit different. So this is Miles Davis, who is also an absolute legend of jazz, if not one of... He might be the most famous jazz musician, definitely from the sort of like second era of jazz, the 1950s onwards era. Miles Davis is the king. Whether a song was considered a jazz standard was was often just a case of, did Miles Davis play it? And then, if he did, it's a jazz standard now. That's the level of influence this guy had. This song is from one of his most well-known albums, if not his most well-known album, called Kind of Blue, which was the introduction of a new style of jazz called modal jazz, where, unlike what Coltrane was doing on that previous track, where he introduced a chord progression, and then they all kind of explored that chord progression. Here, it's still the same general vibe. It's still the head arrangement where you introduce a melody, then everyone improvises, then you go back to the melody. But instead of a chord progression, you effectively have a mode. So rather than, going through a bunch of chords, it's like, okay, we're going to improvise over D Dorian for 16 bars. Then we're going to improvise over E flat Dorian for 8 bars. Then we're going to go back to D Dorian. And that's the alternative to a chord progression. You can boil that down to a chord progression, but that would kind of be missing the point. It's more about modes, about we're going to explore a mode and move that mode to different keys rather than moving around a chord progression. If you look closely, you can also notice that John Coltrane is actually on this album. This album has an amazing lineup of famous musicians on it. It was often the case in this era of jazz, where a lot of these very famous jazz musicians would appear on each other's albums, so you would wind up with all of these interesting lineups. Once again, we won't listen to the entirety of this, but we will listen to a good portion of it. Also listen out for Bill Evans' amazing piano playing. Not necessarily amazing because of its technicality, but amazing because of its kind of voicings and its vibe and its atmosphere. This is So What? Miles Davis. It starts with a kind of piano intro, but then it gets going. Now we've gone to E flat Dorian, and then we're going to go back down to D Dorian where we started. So you could say it was like D minor 7 and then E flat minor 7 and then back to D minor 7, but it's a bit more than that. So this was the head. We've had the head. Now the solos begin. I was mentioning the piano playing. It's not like loads of chords or rhythms, it's just like kind of painting an atmosphere for Miles to then solo over. Also, you might notice that, unlike with the John Coltrane track, the solo here, and this track at least, is far less acrobatic, far less intense. It's more a sense of a casual exploration. Taylor Swift says in the chat that it's Miles Davis' birthday on Friday. Well, if he was still alive, that is. I just realised, I don't know when Miles Davis died. I guess the early 90s. Oh, good guess, if I do say so myself. He died in 91. So, much like with the John Coltrane track, we won't listen to the entirety of this because it's long. You know, we've listened to 5 minutes of it so far and we're only halfway through. But this is So What, Miles Davis. If you want to get into jazz and you don't know where to start, this album I would highly recommend. People have mentioned in the chat how it's the best-selling jazz album of all time, and that is for good reason. It's very accessible, particularly for Miles Davis. So yeah, check it out. Kind of Blue. This is the opening track, but it's all of the tracks are great. Anyway, that's enough of Kind of Blue. So what for today? I'm afraid. Let's move on, because now we have our final recap. This is everything we've listened to so far. It's been a long list, as always. You always forget how long it can take to get through 30 songs. We've been here for 2.5 hours now, but we're on the final stretch. Final 5 songs, and we really are getting into some songs now, which I really love. If anyone was watching the 60s countdown, you might remember that there was a song. I mentioned that there was a song that was going to be in the 60s list, and then I realised that it actually came out in 1959, so it got put into this list instead. That song we're yet to hear. So that song is in... Well, I'll tell you now, it's number 1. That song went from being a song in the 60s list to being number 1 in the 50s list. So you'll soon see what that song was. But anyway, let's crack into number 5 now. And we've mentioned her before in this list. We've listened to her already. We listened to Blue Skies earlier by Ella. This is Love Is Here to Stay by Ella. This is another American songbook classic. This is a song written by George Gershwin. George Gershwin, of course, wrote Summertime. He wrote Rhapsody in Blue. He wrote... I can't remember what else he wrote. He wrote many, many classic songs. Lady Be Good. What else did he write? He wrote Somebody to Watch Over Me. I Got Rhythm. That's a big one. The Man I Love. Just an absolute staple of the American Songbook, Gershwin. This song comes from Ella's record, which was a big collection of Gershwin songs. As I mentioned earlier, she worked her way through the American Songbook by doing albums of the famous writers of the American Songbook. So this song, just like most American Songbook songs, was originally written for a Broadway musical. It was written, I'm going to guess, in the 20s. Might have been the 30s. I'm going to just look it up now. It was written in... Oh, no, I was wrong. It was written in 1938 for a movie called The Goldwyn Follies. But as is the case with most American Songbook songs, even though they were originally written for films and Broadway plays, the songs actually nowadays have kind of outlived the thing they were originally from. Most people, even the people who play those songs, like myself, don't know what the original source was, because so many people have covered and recovered the American Songbook. And I actually imagine in 100 years' time, it will be a similar situation with many of the songs we know and love today. Like songs, like some of the Beatles songs, many of the Beatles songs, I imagine, will be part of the sort of 20th century canon of songs, the popular songbook. But many people won't necessarily remember or be familiar with the original version. That's what I'm predicting. I might not live long enough to see it, but that's what I predict will happen in the future. Because, the 1950s, we were at the beginning of popular music. We haven't even seen 100 years yet of popular music. So in 100 years from now, when there's twice as much popular music than there is already, how will people keep track of it all? How will people be familiar with everything? They won't be. They will only have passing knowledge of some of the music that came before, much like we do of this music here that we're listening to tonight. So anyway, without me yabbering on anymore, this is Love Is Here to Stay, Ella Fitzgerald, written by George Gershwin. And lyrics by... Who are the lyrics by? Oh, of course. The lyrics are by Ira Gershwin, who was George Gershwin's brother? Yes.
It's very clear our love is here to stay, not for a year, but ever and a day. Just be passing fancies, and in time may go.
It's kind of ironic. I didn't actually plan this at all, but one of the lyrics in the song is about how all of the songs we know might just be passing fancies, and one day will go. Literally what I was saying beforehand, probably just subconscious.
Going a long, long way. In time, the Rockies may
Charlie the Explorer, welcome to the stream.
May tumble, they're only made of clay, but our love is here to stay.
Tater Swift, thank you for subscribing with Prime. You'll now be able to use the exclusive emotes which were added as of today, which have all sorts of things, including pictures of me and pictures of the Beatles, all sorts of rubbish.
But oh, my dear, our love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. In time, the Rockies may crumble, Gibraltar may tumble, they're only made of clay, but our love is here to stay. It's here to stay. It's here to stay.
here to stay.
Love is Here to Stay, the version by Ella Fitzgerald. Personally, I think any American Songbook song is made better when sang by Ella. Truly one of the best voices ever. I can see the emotes are going down well. Tater Swift has found the 6-8 emote. There's actually a different time signature emote for each tier. If you're a follower, you get 4-4. And then in subscriptions, I don't completely know how it works, but there's like 3 different tiers. One tier gets 6-8. Another tier gets 5-4. And the last tier gets 19-8 or something like that. Just to get a bit ridiculous. But anyway, really getting to the top songs now in our list of the top songs of the 1950s. Kind of forgot what decade it was then. Number 4, What I'd Say, Ray Charles. This song, much like a few of the other songs on this list, was a big influence on a lot of the bands in the 60s, bands like the Beatles. This is also one of the very first songs to use a electric piano, a Wurlitzer piano to be precise. And the reason for that is because the original purpose of the electric piano, like the Wurlitzer piano, was as a substitute for an acoustic piano. So, for example, Ray Charles would tour with an electric piano because the quality of the acoustic piano available at the venue for him to use could vary. So to make sure he always had a good instrument to play, if the acoustic piano at the venue was rubbish, he would tour with this Wurlitzer electric piano, which of course doesn't quite sound like an acoustic piano, but it was a good substitute. Now, for one of his encores, Ray Charles started improvising this riff, this electric piano riff, which is the riff of What I'd Say. And it was from that improvisation that this song developed. And with that, he pioneered a new way of using the electric piano, using it as an instrument into itself, leaning into its sound rather than using it as an emulation of an acoustic piano. Much like how the Hammond organ was an emulation of a church organ, it took on its own life later on. So let's have a listen to this. This is Ray Charles, What I'd Say, and therefore establishing it in people's minds as an actual instrument in its own right, rather than a substitute for acoustic piano. But anyway, that takes us into the top 3. Oscar's saying it sounds like a Beatles song. Ray Charles, particularly this song, is definitely an influence on the Beatles, so I wouldn't be surprised at all. Anyway, number 3, Nina Simone. Nina Simone is an amazing artist, incredible interpreter of songs. So she was someone who, like many of the artists on this list, didn't really write their own songs, but interpreted existing songs that had been written by other people. So Mood Indigo was written by Duke Ellington, one of the biggest jazz composers and arrangers and musicians, who's legendary in his own right. But anyway, this is a cover of a Duke Ellington song. What I love about Nina Simone and her piano playing and her singing is how she combines blues and jazz with classical. Because Nina Simone her original ambition was that she wanted to be a concert pianist. And she was a very good classical piano player. But because of her ethnicity at that time, she couldn't be a concert pianist. There's a story, and I believe it's true, that she was once giving a piano recital, and her parents, who of course were black, were meant to be sitting in the front row, but they weren't allowed to because they were black. And Nina Simone, even as I believe a teenager at this time, refused to play because of that. And it was that sort of protest and defiance that defined her career. She was truly an artist tied in with politics and the very important politics of that era. But anyway, This is her version of Mood Indigo. Listen to her piano playing, because of course she's a great vocalist, but she's also a great piano player. Listen to the way she combines classical sort of Bach-esque piano lines with jazz. I love it so much. It's a big part of what I try and do with my piano playing, is combining those two different worlds. Mood Indigo, Nina Simone. How classical that sounds. Counterpoint in a jazz song.
Never been blue. No, no, no. You ain't never been blue till you've had that mood indigo. That feeling goes stealing down to my shoes while I just sit here and sigh. Go long blues. I always get that mood indigo since my baby said goodbye. And in the evening when the lights are low, I'm so lonely I could cry, for there's nobody who cares about me. I'm just a poor fool that's bluer than blue can be. When I get that mood indigo, I could lay me down and die. No, 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 no. You ain't never been blue till you've had that mood indigo. That feeling goes stealing down to my shoes while I just sit here and sigh. Go long blue.
Let's talk about classical, talking about Bach. What's more classical than Bach than Picardy Third at the end there? We mentioned Picardy Thirds last time, actually. Picardy Third, or a tierce de Picardy, is when a passage of music in the minor key ends on the major chord instead. So if you're in D minor, for example, you end on D major, and it makes it sound bright and conclusive, and very typical classical music. And that's how Mood Indigo by Nina Simone ended. Brilliant song from a brilliant album. One of the greatest artists of all time, Nina Simone. All right, we got 2 songs left. And here's number 2. Mr. Louis Prima is back again. We listened earlier to Louis Prima. We listened to Just a Gigolo. This is from the album that came after that, which is, I think the album was called Call of the Wild. And the album before it, which had Just Gigolo one, was called The Wildest. So both about wild for some reason. Pennies from Heaven. This isn't a song that Louis Prima wrote. It's a very common theme tonight that these songs aren't necessarily written by the artist. This song was written earlier, probably for a film, I think. I can't remember. But this is probably the most well-known version of Pennies from Heaven. It has been covered by other artists. Frank Sinatra did a good version as well. But I love this version. It got excellent energy. Much like I was saying with the other Louis Prima song we're listening to, you can feel the showmanship, the live energy of him and his band through the recording. So even if, I've kind of almost in a negative light been saying how 1950s recordings, they hadn't quite got past the idea yet of live music and recorded music being different mediums. So, at this time it was effectively just capturing a live performance was the role of recorded music. Whereas in the 60s and 70s and onwards, you started getting recorded music, which was a medium into itself, just of its, you couldn't even create that music live if you wanted to. But even though, I love the Beatles, of course, who their whole thing was making music which could only be recorded music, Louis Prima shows how a live performance can still feel live when it's been bottled and put into a recording and listened to almost 70 years later. This song is just such good energy. Really good feel-good song. Pennies from Heaven, Louis Prima.
And every time it rains, pennies from heaven.
Shooby-dooby.
Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven?
Shooby-dooby.
You'll find your fortune falling all over town. Be sure that your umbrella is upside down, and trade them for a package of sunshine and ravioli.
Macaroni.
If you want the things you love, you must have a pizza-oli, baby. And when you hear thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me. Now come over here, boy, Sam. And every time it rains, and don't you know it's crocodile? Every time it rains, and don't you know it's
I love the call and response here. And you'll hear in a second how Louis tries to catch Sam, the saxophone player, out.
Be sure that your umbrella is upside down to live up. Habazuti Hose White, Gigalama Hungli, Zumalu the Zuburut. Oh, Bodley boys, oi. Hey, Baba Harboy. Ooh, Baba Harboy. Woody woo. Ooh! I knew I'd get you. Let's go. Let's go.
Hear these gear shifts. Each time we go around the rotation, something new happens.
And you'll find your fortune falling all over town. There'll be pennies from heaven. Pennies from heaven. Pennies from heaven for you and me.
That's Pennies from Heaven, Louis Prima, number 2 on my list of the top 30 songs of the 1950s. And now we get to see number 1. And I wonder if you guys have guessed what it is. I've given 2 clues so far. One of the clues was that it is a song that I thought was out in the 1960s and therefore was going to be in my 60s list. But then I realised it was actually a 1959 song. So I put it in the 50s list. And as you can see, it was so good. It got to number 1. It wasn't even... I was going to be in the 60s list and instead it's now number 1 in the 50s list. That was one of the clues. The other clue is that there is an emoji that I've added to this today, which is only available for subscribers, I believe, which is very relevant. And Melodia has already guessed it. Guessed the song. It is Take 5, Dave Brubeck Quartet. For many people, an introduction to jazz. This is, I think, the best-selling jazz song of all time. Now, what I find amazing about the song, of course, the whole concept of this album is odd time signatures. This song is the most famous example of a song in 5/4, which, if you don't understand what that is, it means that the song is based around a count of 5 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Instead of the more typical 4. Jazz was almost always based around 4/4 or 3/4, usually 4/4. And then Dave Brubeck thought, let's change that. And this album is all about experimenting with different time signatures. It's an amazing album, one of my favorite albums of all time. Take 5 is the most well-known song from it. Actually written by the band saxophonist who was called Paul Desmond. So we shouldn't forget that. It's not actually written by Brubeck, although he did write many of the other songs on the album. Because this song is like an intro to jazz, because a lot of people, including myself, first came to jazz listening to this song because it's so well known, I at least thought that odd time signatures were a particularly jazzy thing. I thought it was something you saw a lot in jazz. But actually, odd time signatures are rare in jazz. It's very uncommon to find odd time signatures in jazz. They're far more something you would find in prog rock, in some slightly later time classical music. So like, 19th and 20th century classical music would use odd time signatures. Jazz, not so much. That's what Brubeck was trying to change. And of course, he managed to write something exceedingly popular for a time signature that most would assume is too complicated or dense for the average listener. But no, this song is not harboured at all by the fact that it's in 5/4. This is my favourite song from the 1950s, and one of my favourite songs of all time. One of my favourite moments of the song, listen out for, is the drum solo by what's his name, Morello, Joe Morello, I think. Absolutely brilliant drum solo because it's really melodic. You'll hear what I mean. Anyway, that's enough talking. This is Take 5. GML Music, welcome to the chat. I'm really glad you enjoy my YouTube videos. From Northern Ireland as well. Did you catch my recent video about geography of the UK? Where I explain to the Americans what Northern Ireland is? Drum solo. Coming up. It's not showy offing. It's not shredding. It's just creative. Melodic on a non-melodic instrument. Classic. Take 5, Dave Brubeck Quartet. Number 1 on my list of the top 30 songs of the 1950s. Thank you for watching. Last little nugget I wanted to tell you about that song is my wife's grandfather, so my grandfather-in-law, who passed away about 18 months ago. He had that song as his entrance to his funeral, so as the coffin came in, and I thought it was just such a cool choice. I didn't know, I was quite involved in like the music for that service, but I didn't know that that was the song for the entrance, and when I heard it I was like, yes, that's cool. It's like complete. I don't know, maybe someone else has had that at some point, but it just feels like such an original thing to do, which just makes it hit that bit harder. But it's also one of those things that when you hear a song at a funeral, it forever reminds you of that. Not in a bad way at all. If anything, in a good way. But anyway, that's my list. And if we go to the next slide, hopefully, yes, here we go. We have the entire list. It's kind of small. It's kind of annoying. Can I make it bigger? Can I maybe change that? That made it better, kind of. Yeah, that'll do. Yeah, that's enough of that. But anyway, that's our list, and that's the last decade list I'll be doing, apart from our circlement back around to the 2020s, which is a little bit of a non-entry because we're only a third of the way through. So by the end of the 2020s, I'm sure I'll have a very different list to show you. But I've got lots of songs that I love from the 2020s that I want to share with you. Also, keep an eye on my Twitch schedule, because I've also got a stream coming up soon where I'll be reviewing music by you guys, reviewing original music that you guys have written. I've already got lots of submissions for it, but if you also want your song to be listened to during that stream, send me an email, and I will try and fit it in. And if you do send me an email, I will reply to you and let you know if you're going to be on the stream, because the best thing about it is having you guys watch as I review music, because then in real time we can sort of chat about it. Just adding my email address to the chat in case anyone wants to do that. Just send me a link to your music somewhere I can listen to it, and I'll add it to that stream. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this stream, as is the case of all of the decade streams that I've done. Countdowns will be available on the second YouTube channel. So if you'd like to catch what you've missed, if you didn't watch the whole thing, make sure you subscribe to my second YouTube channel, David Bennett Piano's second channel. Catchy name, I know. Also, this stream will be published as a VOD on Twitch, but as I mentioned before, so many of the songs will get muted automatically because of copyright, so it's worth watching on YouTube. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a wonderful evening.